Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer, and with me again, Miss Deb Romero, certified Alexander technique instructor. And I have to add, didn't you teach anatomy, human anatomy, for many years?
I was the head instructor at the massage school in Charlottesville for a couple of years and taught just about everything, but anatomy was the big one.
Ah, yeah,
But that
that's
was years
why.
ago, so it's back in the cobwebs.
Yeah, but you're still my go-to anatomy expert when we get into it. And today's topic, it's particularly important because I wanted to talk
Mm,
about internal straightness and
mm,
what that
what the
means.
heck?
Yeah, because it's important. Really important for us to understand it when it comes to horses. There's some particular issues with that, but also as riders or just walking around every day
Right.
as human beings, because a lot of people still think good posture means thrusting the shoulders back, which for women basically arcs the spine forward.
Mm,
So you get kind of a bowed alignment of the spine rather than actually a straight alignment of the spine.
right. And it's cultural. The language we use.
I
Sit
was
up
just,
straight, all of the culture of what we see when we're growing up, role modeling. It's
well, and when it comes to like straightness is a big part of riding a horse, and just the word straight conjures up so many
mm,
different meanings. It's ridiculous.
yeah,
So I think we need to break down what does straight really mean. Because we can even be talking external or internal when it comes
oh
to
my
our
gosh,
horses.
yes.
So today's topic is internal straightness. So let's look at that
Okay.
because an external path of travel that's a straight line, we can walk while we're very crooked, and our horses can track a perfectly straight line while internally they're not straight at all. So what do you mean if I asked you, what does it mean, internal straightness?
Mm,
What does that mean to you?
for a human or a horse, or
Yeah.
does it matter? Okay. Internal straightness. There's just so much language around that I don't want to use. Um,
Well, when you're working with Alexander
mhm.
technique students, is that a word that even comes up, internal straightness? Or
It's
how do you
mhm.
talk about it or address it? And is it even important for humans?
Right. Those are all great questions. I never use the term internal straightness because when it seems like when we use the word straightness, people become rigid or think
Mm,
it's a muscular efforting. Oh, right there. I'm straight. Um, where to me, I think we've talked in the previous podcast, there's something about when the human spine gets organized that there's this I can actually kind of move the whole spine from the hips to the top of the head as one unit. It's all integrated. It's organized within itself. It's communicating, where it's going, like which way's too far, that type of thing. And the central nervous system is on board with, oh yeah, that feels really good.
yeah.
People usually take a deep breath and, because the central nervous system is saying, yeah, that's it. That's where it is. And
Well,
it's
what I hear you say all the time instead of straight is you look more vertical.
vertical.
You're
Is it?
finding
Yeah.
your length. Like you
Hmm.
used very different words than straight because of what
Right.
that usually conjures up. But we could interchange the words more vertically aligned with gravity, finding
Right.
your length and your width through your back.
Yeah,
right?
and that's one of the things I say to people all the time. Can you stay in your length, your vertical length, and your width without shortening and still do a task?
And that's what I'm referring to using the term internal straightness,
Right,
is that vertical alignment. If we think of any vertebrate, the skull, the spine, the rib cage as the axial skeleton, and I always like to include the pelvis, even though that's not technically
yeah,
accurate.
we do.
But that axial skeleton for humans, our length, which is really the length of our body, is that axis, that needs to maintain a stable alignment with gravity in the up-down direction, in the vertical direction for us to be in balance. For horses, their skull, spine, rib cage, and pelvis are horizontally oriented over gravity.
Right,
Any quadruped, right?
right.
So, but it's the same axis. It's just a more, we could think of it from our perspective, it's a more parallel relationship of
Oh,
the
I like
axial
that.
skeleton to gravity. So horizontal to horizontal, where as bipeds, we're more sort of like a T-junction to gravity. We're sort of
Right.
vertically aligned to this horizontal plane of gravity, at least on Earth, right?
Well, that's true.
At least as long as we're in gravity.
I can't speak about the out of gravity experience.
But I think I started using the term internal straightness with horses because most people, when we talk about straightness while we're riding horses, all that means to most people is either tracking an external path of travel,
Mhm.
which has nothing to do with what's happening internally through the spine, or we think if the head and maybe the pole is centered between the front legs with the middle of the back, then our horse must be straight.
Wow.
And to me, and that's really the purpose of side reins when we lunge, is to keep the
Well, I
neck
never thought of
straight,
it that, yeah,
right?
okay.
A lot of training devices are to sort of
Mhm.
stabilize the neck to be in the middle of the back. But that's only one dimension.
Yes.
It's only thinking of sort of the function regarding lateral bending of the spine, which would misalign the neck vertebra from the back vertebra if it's laterally bent left or right. So yes, that is one part of straightness, but it's only one dimension. And
Right.
classically, that's the only vocabulary in horse training, is to talk about straight sort of in context of nose to tail. But then there's
Mhm.
rotation as a function. And rotation, which is a twisting motion, if we put that twisting motion on the horizontal plane of the horse's skeleton, it becomes what we feel as a rolling motion side to side. So the whole,
Would you say it's kind of like I hear this all the time. Oh, the saddle's always higher on one side than the other.
yeah, rotation is absolutely the root cause
That
of that.
thing. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And
And
so,
that's just a horse that's rotating heavy to one side.
yeah. So ideally, for internal straightness to be achieved, we actually have to reduce all lateral bending of the spine through the horse until the proper alignment comes together, which is what you're talking about, where you say people are becoming more vertical. It's an integration or sort of a detailed, specific alignment of each vertebra with the other, like
Yeah.
where it's supposed to be, which mechanically those bones are not straight and that alignment is not geometrically straight. So we can't straighten the bones and achieve internal straightness, which sounds weird because the spine always has natural curves and twists. But when each vertebra of the spine is aligned and integrated into one whole unit, what I find is it does generate a geometric straight line of force.
I think the important thing that you brought up is it's not just the neck. I mean, it has to be just like with humans, it has to be all the way from the top of the spine to the tailbone and
Yeah.
everything in between.
Yes.
Yeah,
Because it's going to affect everything in between.
exactly.
Yeah. And so internal straightness to me with the horse is two-dimensional. There's a straightness nose to tail through the horse's midline, but also what's rarely ever considered, and I see this tilting or rolling effect of the
Mm,
horse's barrel and hindquarter, even in high-level riding, where if we don't address or stabilize the rotation function or the twisting of the spine in conjunction with the spine's ability to bend laterally, then we don't have a level line of force
exactly.
across the horse's back and pelvis, right? Which they
Yeah,
can cope with easier as a quadruped than we can as a biped.
right. Right.
Although I know you find all the time people have a habitual twist that they
Oh,
sort of
yeah.
carry somewhere in their
Yeah.
spine,
Yeah.
that's just as common as being left-handed or right-handed.
Right. It's just a habitual pattern that you develop through life.
Hmm. So internal straightness, whether I'm talking about the rider or the horse, means no side bending and no side to side twisting. So that's two different functions of the spine and two different dimensions of the body, the front
Right.
back as well as the left right.
Hmm.
And that in Alexander terminology, what's the catchphrase they always use that goes back 100 years? The back, oh, I know it's like a sequence of things to
Oh,
check.
I'd
So
have to get out my little saying. Head goes forward, up, back lengthens and widens, knees go forward and away.
that's it. So the
Yeah,
back lengthening
lengthens and
and
widens.
widens.
So
So
that's
if
the
it's
opposite of what it's kind of like what I'm saying. Can you stay in your length and your width and still do the task that you're asking your body to do?
right, which means no habitual, even invisible
Invisible.
bending and twisting,
Mhm.
right? Because that's the other thing I find with riders a lot, and it's hard for riders to wrap their head around at first, that your horse can look straight. The pole looks straight ahead of our seat bones, the neck looks straight in front of us, the horse looks straight nose to tail. And even if we've resisted some of that rolling or twisting effect in the second dimension, it doesn't mean that the spine actually has found ideal alignment.
Right.
And so explain how there can be an invisible lateral bend or twist where a person or a horse doesn't perceptively look twisted or bent, but the spine is doing exactly that. How do you know it when you put hands on people, or how is it possible for a body to do that?
I have it in my own body that I
Me too.
I'm not special, people.
Yeah.
I've got my own hangups from my own traumas, and I notice um, I can feel it internally, even though it may appear that I'm not left side dominant. I definitely have a shortening that I can feel in my between my rib cage and the top of my pelvis that I access all the time, especially mucking stalls or
On the
something
left side or the right side?
left side because I'm left-handed. So
Mm.
um or a specific spiral we may use, say, to open a door. There's a habitual way that we approach a door and spiral to open that door.
Hmm. Or
Yeah.
I'm thinking getting in and out of the car,
Same
getting on and
thing.
off a horse. Yeah.
Yep.
And when I'm mucking stalls, I invariably twist my spine mercilessly and it just wreaks havoc. And I have to go so slow to not twist and bend my spine when I'm mucking stalls. It's so annoying. It's like I haven't fully changed that habit. I'm much faster if I torque my spine into a twist. I don't know why that is.
And that I was just thinking of like the extreme athletes have actually, most of them trained themselves to stay in their best use, but that takes a lot of training when
It's a
you've
lot of
got,
concentration.
yeah, when you've got, like you said, that time barrier.
Yeah, or something you want to get done.
Right. That is our biggest thing. Our biggest threshold is, can I stay in my length and my width with my back opening and widening and muck stalls? I don't know. Some
And
days I
to me,
can.
that's what I call, can I remain internally straight?
Yeah,
It's the same thing, length and width. Or
length and width.
in a horse, it's a straight midline. It's not that the bones are straightening out. It's that the line of force becomes straighter and more stable between our horse's nose and tail. So the whole midline, half of what I would call internal straightness, is reducing what we feel like as a noodly effect, or our
Hmm.
horse takes the shape of a curve, which is actually what we're taught when we put our horse on a circle, that the midline should curve to the path of the circle or a turn. And that was really based on the old belief that the horse's spine bends laterally in equal amounts from head to tail, which we now know is not the case with modern research on functional anatomy. It actually bends more in some areas and less in others.
Right.
But I go, before I can find a correct lateral bend, I find the horses are so misaligned that I need to establish that straight line of force, or that ideal alignment, before I can correctly ask for lateral bend, or before my horse could find the right coordination of lateral bending without destabilizing the rotation,
Right.
right? So if we think of internal straightness as a straight line of force in our horse, nose to tail, and a level line of force side to side, left to right, under our seat bones, almost as if the horse had, we were sitting on a teeter-totter that went left and right and went front to back. Those two dimensions have to stabilize and become level before our horse is what I would call internally straight.
It reminds me of that game. Did you ever have one of those little games that you had a little tiny stainless steel or sterling ball, little tiny ball, and you're trying to get it in one of the little holes in the
Oh, yes.
It's like, "Oh my god, it's
Yeah.
everywhere. It's moving everywhere."
Yeah, like you're tilting the game to get the little
Yeah,
balls in the
it's
slots.
everywhere.
Yes.
Where it's over here. Whoa, it went out that door. It went this way.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And if there was one thing I could say to all riders that would massively improve the movement of their horse, is quit trying to turn your horse's spine into a curved banana shape. Like that, every time we do that, whenever the horse's midline actually feels wiggly or curved, then the spinal function that's not even part of classical training vocabulary, it's not even on the radar to be described or what to do about it, is the rotation, which creates that rolling effect of the
Exactly.
barrel and the pelvis. And so a lot of times I'll see people complain about, oh, this shoulder is dropped or that shoulder is bulging, but the whole torso of the horse is
Hmm.
leaning into the turn or leaning to the outside of the turn.
Right. And I think we don't as riders, we've talked about this before. We've lost the lost sixth sense about kinesthesia, and we think if we first see it, but it's happening way before we visually see a shoulder drop.
Yes.
Yeah, so really tapping into, and I do this when I feel safe, is I'll ride with my eyes closed just to take away that visual levelness
Hmm.
and look more for, well, what's internally level?
Yeah, what's coming up into my body as a rider
Yeah,
from the movement of the horse.
right. Only if you feel
Okay.
safe to do
Yeah,
that.
and a lot of times I find this really interesting that as riders, we all know and notice the side effects of
Mm,
unstable rotation, which is excessive twisting of the horse's spine left to right. And we we don't notice while it's happening. It's
right.
particularly challenging to teach riders to feel that vertical upward downward force that's related to the twisting of the horse's spine. But almost all riders notice the after effect or the
Mhm.
habitual effect, which would be, oh, my saddle is sliding around. I must need a tighter girth,
Or
right? Or
it's high on one side.
it's high on one side, and so I need to get it flocked asymmetrically. I need more flocking on this side because the back muscles have atrophied for some unknown reason, and and I need to jack up the saddle on one side. Or I've had high level trainers tell riders, "Oh, you're just going to bring your left stirrup up two holes so that your feet are level and your legs are level to each other."
That
But
is so bizarre.
yeah, or so the stirrups being uneven, which is a really prevalent strategy for balancing a rider, is to make the stirrups uneven, which basically means the stirrups are uneven because the saddle is unlevel, and the saddle is unlevel because the horse's back is unlevel, right?
Right.
And then you see people all the time, like on trail rides, their horse stops for a second and they lean and pull the saddle back to the center because it's slid off to one side or the other.
Hmm.
I go, that's the effect of rotation or twisting
Right.
of the horse's spine. And I've even had some clients, when I straighten them out as a rider, they go, "Oh, I had an instructor tell me that my right leg was shorter than my left leg." And how many times, I know we've talked about this before, that you get people walking in to work with you that already believe they have one leg that's shorter than the other, but that can be the result of a chronic habitual twist or
And
bend.
I think, yeah, and I think it's important to state that it's a very low percentage of people that actually have one leg shorter than the other. I mean, skeletally.
Hmm.
So what we're talking about is a soft tissue dysfunction.
Right.
Right. And I would imagine that's the same thing with horses. It's a soft tissue constant misuse.
Yeah. And that's what I was sort of, you had said this to me before, that like it's not unusual for a horse to have an invisible bend. Like, let's say a horse holds an invisible left bend. So the horse looks straight, right? And then if the barrel rolls in the same direction of the bend, we now have a distinct high side and low
Mhm.
side to the horse's back. We have a pelvis that's higher on the right side and lower on the left side in that case. And maybe the shoulder is lower on the left and higher on the right. So, what could happen over time is the horse's back muscles, well, the whole horse's, if we get regular massages for our horse, our massage therapist is telling us how tight our horse is on the right side. of the neck, the back, the hindquarters.
Mhm.
I've had some vets tell clients that the horse has a longer right hind leg versus left hind leg. And I've had even the feet can start to develop differently. You would
Mhm.
have kind of a flat, no heel growth, slipper toe, flat foot on the left front, and an upright foot that grows heel on the right front. And that's also incredibly common,
Right.
right? So
And
if
and I had with my big mare, she was in the thoracics twisted to the left, but in the lumbar twisted to the right, and she would hold her tail to the right. But her
interesting.
thoracics were stuck left.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And the reason that happens and is so common, it's every one of us, it's every human and every horse. We develop these habits of holding a left lateral bend or holding a right rotation because the body's primary requirement is stability
right.
in motion. Otherwise, we couldn't function. So every human body and every horse body finds a way to function, but that doesn't mean we're really utilizing our skeleton, especially our axial skeleton, in the most efficient manner. So part of
Yeah.
training to balance, whether you're looking for athletic results or health results, doesn't matter. But balance means we start to optimize the use of our mechanical skeleton.
Yeah, and I love it. And I wonder if goes on in the horse's mind because I will do before and after pictures, and people don't believe I'm not standing like that.
Yeah, because the brain normalizes
Yeah, and I
whatever
wonder if
is
the
the
horse,
habit.
when you're asking the horse to change, they might quote unquote act out or not be willing or like question your, like, what do you done? No, I'm fine. I don't
Oh,
need
yeah.
that.
Yeah, they do exactly all of that. All of that. No, and the young horses, especially that are still muscularly strong and have a lot of energy, they think changing their coordination pretty much sucks and it's very hard, and they don't see why they can do it, why they need to do it, because they're just fine. Whereas a lot of older horses or lame horses or horses that are struggling, they actually respond very well to the guidance for internal straightness because it brings a lot of ease.
The
It
relief,
brings a
yeah.
lot of ease because to maintain those invisible twists and bends requires a lot of muscle contraction internally. So the skeleton is going one way, and on the opposite side of that skeletal misalignment or that skeletal twist, the soft tissues are what's making the body look straight, while this internal bend or internal twist is just hanging out there all the time. And you helped me with that in my body. I am right-handed, but I have a tendency to contract on my left side
Mm.
and sort of face right with this sort of right twist, but it
Mm-hmm.
pulls on my back on the lower left side, where
Yeah.
yours is kind of the same side, left back,
Left
left-handed,
everything.
and
Yeah.
mine's right-handed. And I go, that's exactly what bodies do. In order to
Mm-hmm.
stabilize, it's a wild card. So I go, if my horse is bending to the left, the rotation could be going dorsal tips left with it, or dorsal tips right against it, or just back and forth and being
Back and
wildly,
forth.
unstably twisting back and forth,
Right. No stability either way. Not stuck either way. Just,
just
yeah.
kind of always in motion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so those are the horses that we say are hard to ride. They have terrible
Mm.
gaits, which is usually blamed on terrible conformation. Or, this is my personal favorite, my horse is a big mover. And so I can't sit
Oh,
still at the trot or the canter because my horse is so big and powerful. And I go, usually it means the spine isn't stable or we haven't yet achieved internal straightness because even a super athletic horse is easier to sit. when we
Right.
reduce and straighten out the lateral bends and we reduce and stabilize the rotation or twisting function. So those two things coming together give us a straight line of force front to back through our horse's midline and a level line of force left to right under our seat bones. And I always imagine it like these sort of invisible beams where
I like that.
I can feel the forces as the spine changes function, gaining and losing ideal use. But I don't need to give aids to address the bones of the spine. I use my aids to address the forces that are generated by different alignments or misalignments of the spine.
Yeah, and I think I know there's people think this way, that if they get to that verticalness or that place, that is this right? And how do I stay there?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
And
why
it doesn't, the body doesn't work that way. It's a flowing, moving thing. You're just constantly trying to bring the atoms swinging closer together.
yeah, I think that's a great way to say it, because what straight really means is no longer dissipating force
Right.
left and right.
Nothing's going out the left, right, front, back door.
Right.
It's all just humming underneath you.
And to me, that's really what balance means, is it's sort of like you're not trying to decrease force or eliminate force.
Good
You're
point.
actually just channeling it into more stable lines in 3 dimensions. So
Right.
you have a left, right, a front, back, and an up, down. And so what you're talking about, finding your length and width, is the up, down, left, right for the human.
Mm-hmm.
And with horses, when I say internally straight, it's that length, but it's front to back on a horse,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then that width or that stability side to side as a levelness across the back, left to right, a levelness across the pelvis, left to right. And
Right.
without that, the muscles are constantly having to overwork so that the body doesn't fall over. I go, the bones and the body weight twist left. That means the right side muscles have to kick in,
Yeah.
or we would have a complete failure of the system, which means, boom, they fall over.
I hope that doesn't happen.
Which can happen,
I
does
don't like
happen.
it when that happens.
Yeah. But I go, stability to me, which is the primary requirement. I go, okay, we as humans have to learn how to not fall off, and horses with a rider have to learn how to not fall over. Right there is your essential stability.
Right.
But in order to gain that essential stability, we may torque ourselves into a bend or a twist or too much flexion or too much extension, and really kind of really put together a severe dysfunctional use of how our spine is supposed to be working, but we're fine because we're stable. It just takes its toll over time with excess energy or small repetitive wear and tear because the body's not really meant to function that way. And so we see the effects of it more long term than short term,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
short
And
term,
yep.
we can all contort our spines, horses and humans, in really amazing creative ways. Like you're talking about, your big mare went one direction with the thoracic and the opposite direction with the
Mm-hmm.
lumbar and called it good.
Yeah, I'm good. It
Yeah.
works for me.
But the training was not easy because
No,
of that problem.
no, she could not. Her thoracics were to the left. She could not pick up her right front leg and abduct
Mm.
because she would hit. It was already too far rotated to the left. So anytime she tried to pick up her right front leg, I mean, she
All,
could do it a little bit, but until she figured out how to get to neutral, that was not, she can do
yeah.
it now.
Yeah, because that excess twisting or bending through the spine is always going to restrict the
Mm-hmm.
mobility of the legs.
Yeah.
And it can restrict it two ways. So, like when they say my horse isn't stepping under, I go, well, that could be because if you have an invisible lateral bend or twist, say, like your example, the thoracic spine is bending left, that's going to create a lot of tightness through the right side of the neck and the right shoulder and the right side of the upper back because the skeleton and the body weight are sort of falling downward
Yeah.
left,
Mm-hmm.
which means the higher side of the body better start gripping
Grabbing.
or we're
Mm-hmm.
going to capsize.
And the interesting thing is her left foot was always bigger than her right.
Yeah, like more like a pancake shape.
Pancake. Yeah.
Hmm.
Uh-huh. It's not anymore.
Yeah,
And this was always you would when we do show tapes together, look at horses and look at her, she could never step under adduct with her right hind because she was so far torqued.
yeah,
There was no way she could possibly bring that right hind underneath her.
exactly. It's the same thing. You have a restricted hind leg. And so a lot of times when people will come to me and say, my horse will pick up the left lead, but not the right lead, or will pick up the right lead, but not the left lead, I go, well, we have two different things that could be going on. Like in the example of your mare who's overloading her left front leg to the point that she's got a pancake foot. That's how chronic it is.
Mm-hmm.
She might not pick up a left lead because she can't get her weight off of the
Off of
leading
it.
leg.
That makes total sense.
But that same horse who is also restricted on her right hind leg, right, with the lumbar
Mm-hmm.
spine sort of twisted the other way and all that restricted mobility of the right hind leg, she might not pick up the right lead because the hind leg can't swing
Under.
forward for the
Mm-hmm.
right lead. It's restricted in its forward mobility. And so she maybe could push off with it and get a left lead, but she can't swing it under herself, which is what would have to happen on a right lead.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to look at the individual horse to go, is the horse not picking up the left lead because there's too much weight on the left front leg,
Good point.
or not picking up the right lead because there's either too much weight on the right front leg or the hind leg can't swing on that lead.
Yeah, it's not simple.
Yeah, and horses that hate canter, that blow up at canter, a lot of times the issue is in canter, it's the only speed where the whole pelvis is going to rotate forward. Both hind legs are going to come more forward than any other speed. So if the horse has been really disengaged with the pelvis more rotated backwards or crooked, then going into canter is going to create a lot of discomfort on those tight muscles when both hind legs have to swing farther forward than they do in walk or trot. And so that's why a lot of times the canter can kind of be the problem gait because
Mm.
of we don't notice the little twists or bends or loss of internal straightness during the walk or trot because our horse is mostly listening to us and we're not falling off and they're not falling over. So we're good,
Right. We're
right?
good.
And they're not too horribly heavy and they basically get done what we want done. And then at the canter, it starts to really show up because we're changing, we're requesting more mobility through the entire hindquarter, which is going to pull more on the muscles of the back. And we're adding speed, which adds force.
Right.
So anything that was sort of very subtle at the walk becomes more magnified at the trot, and then even more magnified at the canter because we've got more force with more speed.
Right.
Excuse me.
And I would think that applies. I'm just thinking about runners, the amount of time they spend, or any athlete, on that slow, methodical training of what they call probably form, whatever they call it these
Mhm.
days, is so critical because once you add speed, it,
Yeah, like even a bad golf swing is a dissipation of forces that could have hit the ball straighter or farther,
right.
right? The same thing with swinging a bat, right? If we're not stable or internally straight through our spine, it's going to restrict the use of one or both arms, or maybe one or both legs. We may twist too much. We may not be able to twist enough when we swing the bat. And so we're not going to get as much concentration of power.
Yeah, and I think what really comes to mind to me is it's not one body part. I mean, one dysfunctional area affects the entire system. It's not, it's global. It's not just, oh, my knee hurts, as you know.
I got the
That
hard lesson on that.
that was the hard one
It's
way
not
back
the
when.
knee.
It's
Yeah,
not the
it's not the knee. But my knee hurts. I know, but
knee.
it's not the knee. But it hurts.
But it hurts. Or and that's a whole nother podcast, is the language we use. Oh, my knee hurts. Is it really your knee? Is it really that? Is it when you say the horse is off on the left front, is it really the leg? Or should we be looking at something else?
Eventually, it will be the leg. But
Eventually, yeah,
eventually,
if it's
because the small repetitive wear and tear, the little bit of extra concussion that one leg is going to get, or another leg is going to tighten and maybe, I don't know, loosen up the stifle or
good point.
restrict the hock, right? So it can be too much tension or too much weight because if the whole body, if those three-dimensional lines of force are not really stable or ideal in the relationship to gravity, then we're going to have excessive tightness and excessive weight targeting specific areas of the body.
Right.
Which one develops the pathology first is unique. Some horses develop pathology because of the excess tension and the lack of mobility. Will develop
Mm-hmm.
arthritic changes or lack of mobility, or even make tendons and ligaments more prone to be torn or stressed or strained. Where the pancake foot is more a result of excessive weight
Force.
constantly.
Yeah, a force, a
Mhm.
constant driving force down on that side.
Right. And I think it was a relief to me to know that everybody has these.
Right.
Everybody. It's just
Even Alexander
every,
teachers 20 years into it. We all have our habitual patterns.
yeah. So it's learning what we should be feeling that tells us when the coordination is really good or we're losing a more ideal coordination, either in ourselves or our horses. And the reason the ideal coordination is important is because it reduces unnecessary wear and tear. It's the most efficient use of the biomechanical body, whether it's horse or human. And
I
so,
think that's key.
well, and
Efficiency. I can't do what I do around this farm if I'm not efficient with my use. I
exactly.
can't I can't accomplish everything.
But we could, when we were 20,
Hmm.
it
We
didn't
could
matter if we were twisted or
push
torqued
through it.
because you could push through it. You were young enough. You rarely hurt yourself, but you had the energy to do it. The
Hmm.
older I get, the more it matters to me if I'm being efficient in my use because I
Huge.
need that extra bit of energy.
Hmm.
Whether I'm riding or doing yard work or landscaping, it's like, oh, that extra energy really comes in
Yeah.
handy nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. An efficient use of the body, I think, is a good way to put it. Finding
And
that efficiency, which is actually kind of like finding the hum. You're just
it's
humming
not that
along.
different from optimizing all of the parts in our cars.
Right.
If one part of the car isn't working at all, the whole engine can shut down,
Right.
right? Or if one part is not working quite ideally, it can wear down the engine over time
Right.
or wear out our tires unevenly or have some effect on the steering or the braking or the acceleration. And it's just because something in there is not working the way it's supposed to, and maybe other parts are having to overwork to do the job. And that's
To
what
find
bodies
that
do.
stability. It's may not
Mhm.
be completely efficient, but it's stable.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
functional.
It's
Yeah.
functional. We
We
get
can
through it.
get to the grocery store and back.
Right.
Yeah. But don't take a long trip.
Yeah, I go to the grocery store with blinders on, like, don't look at anybody. Just go to the grocery store.
So when we're talking about internal straightness, I think the like biomechanics is the study of body parts, and the design of the body parts sort of tells us through the design what function it was ideally intended to do,
That's a good point.
right? More weight bearing, more mobility, less weight bearing, bigger range of motion. Each body part's design sort of indicates in the study of functional anatomy what that body part was really engineered to do for the body. And so, but what kills me is what that's translated to in writing is humans trying to like shuffle bones around in ourselves and our horses. Like you said, did I get it right? Is it
Did
in
I
the
get it
right
right? Is it,
place?
am I
Right?
there yet?
Am I there yet? But Ego, if you think of the mechanics of the body generating specific amounts of force in specific directions, and this goes back to our sort of Newton's laws of motion podcast, that every change in the function of any given body part is going to change the forces of motion that we're either feeling as a rider or experiencing while we're just walking around or driving or sitting or doing what we're doing. So changing the forces of motion in turn kind of guides the mechanical body into more alignment, more efficient use according to the body's design without us having to sort of chiropractically use our leg aid to move the ribs, right? Or pull the neck
Pretty
into a certain
dynamic.
frame. It's like, no, we just have to manage the forces of motion. And so those lines of force became really key, that if my horse's midline feels like a noodle, then I know I have a lot of excess lateral bending. I do not have a stable spine. It's shifting left and right too much, bending left and right too much, right? And that might even be coupled with the barrel rolling side to side too much or
I think
rolling to
that's
one
important
side.
that that's two separate things.
Yeah, that's
That
why
that
you can't say my horse looks straight. I'm golden. Yeah, that's only one small part of it. Or my horse can walk a straight path of travel. I'm golden. It's like,
Right.
no, we have this levelness factor across the barrel and the hindquarter, plus a absolutely straight line of force
Right.
through the horse's midline. Then we know that the spine in two different functions or the body in two different dimensions is beginning to stabilize in an efficient, correct mechanical use that was intended for the body to function that way. Because we can get stability with dysfunctional use.
Oh
That's
yeah.
happens all the time. But the goal of balance is to achieve stability in the most efficient, ideal mechanical use of the body.
And that's a very much going back to the topic, an internal thing.
Yeah, and the crazy part was noticing that the forces of motion become very organized and stable. Like instead of that dissipation of forces where you feel like the horse has eight legs, or you're here, there, and everywhere, or you can't
Right.
slow the horse down, or you can't get the horse to go forward, or you can't make a left turn, or you can't get a right lead. It's like all of that dissipation of forces and energy is the very thing that tells us that the spine is not mechanically efficient, is
Right.
not operating at its best, more optimal use or organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what people tell you, I think, all the time. They feel lighter or they feel,
Yeah. I get a lot of, or what I love is when I ask them, what's different, what's changed. I don't know. I
yeah.
love that answer because that means they're not in their habit.
Yeah,
When they
but
when
they
they say,
can't.
"I don't know, I've never been," it's like, "I've never been here before, I have no clue."
Yeah. Yeah. And for some horses, it can scare them a little.
Yeah.
Like there has to be a real rapport of trust between the horse and rider, because when you monkey around with coordination, it really wreaks havoc with your perception of where your body is in time and space.
Yeah.
And I find some horses just need a thinking break. Like sometimes the nervous
Yeah,
system.
I see that a lot. I see that, and my big mare, as you know, the warning sign that you're pushing the envelope, she would start blowing and snorting, and I'm like, "Oh, ok we're there. Oh, okay."
Yeah, and to me, the warning sign that we're not on track with the body is always what we would call bad behavior.
That's a good
Like,
point.
and it doesn't matter if it's pushiness, heaviness, and dullness, or if it's
Mhm.
ADD, distraction, and a
Good
little
point.
extra sensitivity. That's sort of the horse's body telling the horse's brain, and the horse telling us through their behavior, something doesn't feel right. Something is different.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
might not feel good yet. It might be a bit of a struggle.
Mhm. That's a really good point.
So length and width, I think, is your way of saying what I call internal straightness, which is also length front to back in a horse
Mhm.
and width as a level, stable back left to right. And if we're
Mhm.
not thinking of straightness in two dimensions with a horse,
At least,
at
yeah.
least, then the horse is going to have a lot of trouble engaging the hindquarters and lifting the back.
Mhm.
And I think because that width deal, that levelness across the back and pelvis that I'm looking for internal straightness, we don't have words for that in traditional training. It's just flat out not addressed. And it really blows a lot of riders' minds to pay attention to it for the first time
Yeah.
and go, oh my God, I'm like
I'm
catapulting
over
off.
here.
I'm way over here. I thought I was in the middle.
And I see that with people on the ground too.
Oh, and a lot of riders, what I found super fascinating, last thing I want to add about internal straightness for the horse is when a horse's spine twists or rotates left and right, causing the barrel and the pelvis to roll side to side,
Mhm.
that makes the rider bend. So the rider might be collapsed on one side of their rib
Mhm.
cage or hollow, right? We call it. So rotation in the horse's spine oftentimes causes the rider's spine to bend.
You can see a bend in the shirt. You can see a wrinkle in the shirt.
Hmm.
Yep.
And bending laterally in the horse's spine causes riders to twist
Mhm.
in the saddle.
Mhm.
And I find that so
That's
interesting that
fascinating.
that kind of correlation is very, very normal. So if we're struggling with a twist in our own body, it's likely that our horse has one of those invisible internal
Internal
bends,
twist. Yep.
right? And if we're always struggling to lengthen our ribs on one side or drop our shoulder on one side or lengthen our leg on one side, then it's probably pretty likely that our horse has a rotation issue
Right.
that keeps sort of perpetuating this effect of lateral bending through our spine as a rider.
Yes, so
And
true.
so it's not quite direct, lateral bend causing lateral bend. It's like lateral bending in the horses causes twisting in the human,
Mm-hmm.
and twisting in the horse causes the human spine to bend laterally. But just like the horse, our internal straightness means reducing all side
All
bending
of the forces.
and
Mm-hmm.
reducing all twisting.
Mhm.
So that, like you said, the spine is integrated
Yes.
and becomes one unit. Anything you want to add? Because I found that last little tidbit, I sort of stumbled across that
Yeah,
real.
that's cool. I'm gonna pursue that. That'll
Mhm.
be fun to look for.
Yeah, so if we find ourselves twisting left or right in the saddle a lot, we might explore the idea that our horse has one of these invisible
Mm-hmm.
lateral bends. And if we find ourselves bending a lot side to side, it's probably our
A
horse's
rotation.
barrel, yep, twisting and rolling.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Okay, I guess let's
All right.
wrap it up there.
All right.
I know, blah, blah, blah. But I love this subject of internal straightness
Yeah, I
because
did too.
it's just dipping the toe into more than one dimension as a rider. We don't have to consider all three yet, but at
No,
least
that's
two.
too hard. It's this thing.
Yeah, at least two. Yeah. All right, everybody.
All
Thanks
right.
for joining us. And we hope you enjoyed today's podcast on internal straightness. Thanks for liking and sharing and subscribing. It is much appreciated.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye for now.